It all began under the cloak of nightfall, deep in the turbulent waters of the Red Sea, where tensions were already simmering and the world watched the region like a powder keg waiting for a spark. What no one expected was that the spark would come from a miscalculated, reckless attack by the Houthis on a vessel they could barely comprehend. As Iranian-aligned Houthi rebels launched what they believed was a targeted operation against a routine U.S. Navy presence, they were woefully unaware that the routine vessel was anything but ordinary. In fact, it was one of America's most lethal, undetectable, and heavily armed submarines, the USS Georgia, a guided missile submarine capable of unleashing hellfire from beneath the sea. The Houthis, emboldened by recent drone successes and embattled rhetoric, fired off a salvo of missiles and UAVs at what they thought was a vulnerable American logistics ship. But the game had changed the moment their crude surveillance misidentified the Georgia, whose stealth capabilities have been honed over decades of classified improvements. With radar-absorbing coatings, underwater silent running technology, and an elite crew trained for counterstrike scenarios, the Georgia didn't just evade. It retaliated with precision that would haunt enemy planners for years. Within minutes of the first enemy projectile entering engagement range, the submarine's vertical launch systems lit up with Tomahawk cruise missiles, soaring silently through the air toward key Houthi radar installations and coastal command outposts. The strikes were surgical, clean, and terrifyingly effective. Entire weapons caches and radar emplacements were vaporized before anyone could scramble. Meanwhile, from beneath the waves, Georgia's unmanned underwater drones deployed, feeding live recon to CENTCOM and other Navy strike units in the area. Simultaneously, the USS Carney and USS Mason, two Arleigh Burke-class destroyers operating nearby, went into full combat posture, creating a Triforce operational net that completely overwhelmed the rebels' capabilities. It wasn't just retaliation. It was a demonstration of dominance, a message to Iran and every hostile actor watching that the United States was not retreating, not hesitating, and absolutely not vulnerable. The U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet had already been on high alert, but this attack unleashed a level of coordination that was the stuff of modern naval legend. F-18 Super Hornets from a nearby carrier group roared into the sky, intercepting potential follow-up drone threats, while A-18G Growlers jammed Houthi communications and fire control systems. Electronic warfare specialists, cyber teams, and signal intercept units began painting a complete picture of the attack origin, confirming that the strike was not only premeditated, but also potentially coordinated with support from Iranian intelligence proxies. Within hours, senior Pentagon officials confirmed that the strike on the USS Georgia was not only repelled but answered with an overwhelming show of force, leaving behind smoldering ruins where Houthi radar sites once stood. What made the strike even more shocking to the world was the release of declassified footage showing pinpoint Tomahawk impacts, and before-after satellite images proving just how complete the destruction had been. But beyond the firepower, this operation revealed something even more critical: the U.S. Navy's evolving doctrine of seamless underwater-to-surface warfare. It wasn't just about missiles anymore. It was about data, speed, silence, and surgical precision, executed with chilling calm under immense pressure. This was warfare where the enemy never even sees the trigger being pulled. The USS Georgia, despite being decades old, has undergone multiple top-secret upgrades, making it a ghost under the sea. The Houthis never stood a chance, and their mistake in attacking such a vessel may go down as one of the most foolish provocations in modern naval history. But the implications went far beyond Yemen. Global military analysts quickly picked up on the message. The United States has shifted posture, no longer reactive and cautious, but preemptive, data-driven, and deeply integrated across platforms. Reports began surfacing that American drones were already repositioning across strategic choke points, while satellite constellations quietly reoriented above the Middle East. This wasn't an isolated event. It was part of a much bigger recalibration of American strength in the region. And then came the fallout. In the hours that followed the strike, intercepted communications revealed that Houthi leadership had gone dark. Panic swept through key rebel territories as rumors of additional U.S. strikes caused desertions, infighting, and desperate attempts to reposition artillery away from civilian areas. For the first time in months, silence fell across parts of the battlefield. Back in Washington, D.C., defense officials briefed Congress in a closed-door session, while Navy commanders held high-level talks with regional allies like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, preparing for a possible regional escalation. But for the American public and the watching world, one thing was clear. This wasn't just a counterattack. It was a masterclass in deterrence. The wrong submarine had been attacked, and the consequences echoed across continents. Social media erupted with footage of the strike aftermath, and even foreign outlets that normally criticize U.S. operations were forced to admit the scale and discipline of the response. Russia and China took note. Military satellites from those countries reportedly adjusted their positions, watching nervously for any hint of American escalation that might reach beyond the region. In Tehran, public statements were subdued, vague, and carefully worded, a signal that even Iran was uncertain how far the U.S. would take this response. For the sailors aboard the USS Georgia, it was another mission completed with excellence. For America, it was a thunderous reminder that beneath the ocean's surface lurks a silent predator, always watching, always ready, and absolutely unmatched. The Houthis had poked the wrong beast, and the U.S. military had answered with thunder. What followed in the wake of the U.S. retaliation was nothing short of a tectonic shift in naval posture and strategic influence across the Red Sea and the greater Arabian Peninsula. As the USS Georgia and accompanying strike forces slipped back beneath the waves, undetectable and untraceable, U.S. Central Command launched Operation Echo Trident, a classified multi-domain surveillance and strike campaign targeting the deeper logistical roots of Houthi capabilities, revealing not just a localized militant force, but a sprawling web of Iranian-supplied radar nodes, encrypted comms bunkers, and mobile launchers hidden across Yemen's rugged interior. What stunned intelligence analysts wasn't the technology, but the audacity. The Houthis have been building a pseudo-military infrastructure mimicking state-run defense systems, complete with fiber-optic comms, camouflage bunkers, and drone production lines housed beneath civilian infrastructure. But the United States was already ahead of the curve. Satellites orbiting silently above had mapped heat signatures and electromagnetic anomalies across key rebel-held territories days before the incident. U.S. Air Force cyber warfare divisions had already infiltrated several Houthi networks, allowing real-time interception and disruption of countermeasures. So, when Houthi commanders ordered a counterstrike using Iranian-engineered Shahid drones, the U.S. Navy's Aegis systems were already tracking them, intercepting, jamming, and rerouting many of the drones into the sea or directly back into Houthi territory, where one incident even caused a tragic self-inflicted strike on their own ammunition depot near Sada. Meanwhile, the USS Carney and USS Mason launched a new set of coordinated precision strikes using SM-6 and Tomahawk missiles, obliterating any chance the rebels had to regroup. Intelligence was now pouring in from human sources on the ground. Local tribal informants once intimidated by Houthi control, but now emboldened by America's overwhelming response and the decimation of rebel strongholds. Pentagon officials, recognized in the moment, authorized the deployment of MQ-9 Reapers and RQ-170 Sentinel drones to maintain full-spectrum ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance over Yemen's coastline and inland weapons smuggling routes. At the same time, U.S. Navy SEALs, already embedded with special reconnaissance units in undisclosed locations, began disrupting Houthi resupply convoys and intercepting encrypted communications, suggesting Tehran's growing unease. What was once a chaotic asymmetrical battlefield was now a meticulously mapped digital war zone. Every movement tracked, every signal analyzed, and every threat answered with speed and precision. Meanwhile, the USS Georgia remained underwater, far from the battlefield but always in play, armed with over 150 Tomahawks and a crew more than capable of vanishing into the abyss and returning without warning. Its silent presence alone became a strategic deterrent, forcing Houthi planners and Iranian strategists into a chess match they were hopelessly unprepared for. And then came the diplomatic fallout. In a stunning display of support, U.S. allies including the United Kingdom, France, and Saudi Arabia released joint statements condemning the attack and offering expanded intelligence-sharing operations. The French Navy deployed vessels into the Gulf of Aden, while British RAF aircraft flew joint patrols alongside U.S. forces, reaffirming NATO and Western solidarity in the region. China, normally quiet about Red Sea events, issued a rare statement urging restraint from all parties, a clear sign they understood the scale of America's wrath. Back in the U.S., defense analysts took to major networks to break down the attack's failure, showcasing just how advanced American counterstrike systems had become, how this wasn't just a missile-for-missile retaliation, but an annihilation of operational capacity. Even CNN and traditionally skeptical media outlets air clips of the strike aftermath, showing satellite imagery, with Houthi infrastructure reduced to ash. Meanwhile, in Iran, the leadership scrambled to issue controlled statements claiming no involvement, while their military repositioned assets along the Strait of Hormuz. American spy satellites tracked increased chatter and troop movements near Bandar Abbas, prompting the U.S. Navy to quietly reroute 2 additional submarines, believed to be either the USS Michigan or USS Florida, into undisclosed locations in the Arabian Sea, effectively encircling any potential escalation routes Tehran might attempt. The message was now unmistakable. Attacking a U.S. submarine, especially one of the most elite in the fleet, was not just a military mistake. It was a geopolitical catastrophe. The Houthis, now isolated under surveillance and decimated, began issuing frantic calls for ceasefire negotiations through intermediaries. But America wasn't just aiming to stop this attack. It was sending a clear strategic warning to every hostile actor watching from the shadows. The U.S. does not blink, and it does not tolerate threats to its sailors. Meanwhile, deep beneath the surface, the USS Georgia cruised silently through the currents like a shadow from the deep, its sensors scanning the waters, its communications encrypted and silent, its crew at battle readiness. Every sonar ping, every electromagnetic signal from shore was monitored, filtered, and cataloged, feeding directly into U.S. Strategic Command, which by now had rerouted multiple geosynchronous satellites to keep eyes locked on the region. Across the world, naval academies began studying the strike as a case study in rapid force escalation and strategic dominance, how America used stealth, speed, and coordinated multi-domain warfare to completely erase an enemy's initiative. This wasn't just power, it was mastery. And somewhere in the Secure Operations Center, a Pentagon official looked at a live feed of the Red Sea and muttered what military historians would later echo for years. They attacked the wrong submarine. And now the ocean remembers. The Houthis' overconfidence had invited a reckoning, and the waters they once used to smuggle weapons and intimidate shipping lanes had turned against them. What lay ahead wasn't just a regional rebalancing. It was the rise of a new American maritime doctrine, where no threat goes unanswered and no attack goes unpunished. And as the dust settled from America's thunderous retaliation, the strategic landscape across the Middle East had shifted permanently. The Red Sea, once a hotbed of proxy threats, rogue naval harassment, and covert missile tests, now shimmered with a new reality. The U.S. Navy had redrawn the map with tomahawks and submarines. The attack on the USS Georgia, if you could even call it that, had become a textbook example of tactical miscalculation by a non-state actor emboldened by false confidence and foreign encouragement. The world took notice. From the Kremlin to Pyongyang, from Beijing to Damascus, military analysts pored over intercepted communications and scrambled to update strategic planning. The question wasn't if America would respond. It was how fast, how surgical, and how devastating the consequences would be. The Pentagon, without a single man lost or injured, had dismantled an entire rebel naval threat, shattered its surveillance network, burned its munitions stockpiles, and digitally blinded its command structure. Behind the scenes, U.S. Cyber Command quietly launched simultaneous offensives on offshore banking nodes used to funnel Houthi funds. Cryptocurrency exchanges and dark web weapons marketplaces associated with the rebels suddenly faced blackouts and unexplained outages. What wasn't destroyed by missile was erased by code. At CENTCOM, the Joint Chiefs were already finalizing the next phase of presence operations, new forward-deployed sonar grids along critical straits, rapid deployment marine outposts ready to launch ISR drones at a moment's notice, and partnerships with regional naval allies for real-time tracking of any unusual surface activity. The USS Georgia, despite having disappeared back into the abyss, had become an icon overnight. Its name was trending on every military blog, mainstream news platform, and classified defense memo. Even on Capitol Hill, bipartisan support surged as lawmakers viewed the precise response as a masterstroke in showing strength without plunging into a full-blown war. Recruitment into Navy submarine force rose noticeably over the following weeks as young patriots across the country watched dramatic CGI simulations of the Georgia launching her payload under the stars, silent and swift like the wrath of Poseidon itself. American shipyards in Groton and Newport News reported heightened funding for next-gen subdevelopment, and veterans communities celebrated the return of underwater supremacy as a defining factor in U.S. deterrence strategy. Meanwhile, the Houthis, now weakened, humiliated, and cut off from international sympathy, found themselves betrayed by their own propaganda. Their attempt to craft a narrative of resistance had been drowned in the tidal wave of America's response. Iranian handlers, once the hidden hand behind the curtain, grew silent, worried their involvement would be confirmed, and that the next strike might not target rebel proxies but more valuable assets. U.S. intelligence agencies ramped up satellite tracking of military shipments near Keshem Island and Chabahar Port. American F-35s and B-2s began conducting joint stealth exercises from undisclosed locations in the Indian Ocean. The message was clear. If Tehran wanted to escalate, America was ready, but Iran blinked first. Back-channel messages were sent via intermediaries in Oman, signaling a desire to de-escalate and deny direct involvement. But Washington wasn't naive. State Department officials, briefed by Navy commanders and cyber specialists, knew that this wasn't just about a single submarine incident. This was a warning flare in the dark, part of a larger game of shadows being played in contested waters. From that moment forward, every U.S. submarine deployed to the region was accompanied by an invisible wall of ISR satellites, AWACS patrols, and covert support vessels. The Red Sea would never again be a playground for asymmetric threats. The ocean, vast and eternal, now echoed with the silence of American supremacy. And even as the Georgia moved through the depths toward its next patrol point, the legend of its survival, and the storm that followed, spread like wildfire. Navy schools updated curricula with a new case study titled Red Sea Gambit. Tactical think tanks began writing papers titled Echo Warfare in the Undersea Theater. Other nations' submariners took note. If the Houthis had struck any other submarine, the world might have forgotten, but they hit the USS Georgia, and the sea answered. Every sonar ping from that moment on carried a whisper warning to any who listened closely. Do not provoke the silent service. America's wrath may be silent, but it is absolute. In the end, what the Houthis fail to realize is that America's underwater fleet is not merely a force. It's a doctrine, a deterrent, a legacy of steel and silence. And when you attack that doctrine, you don't just wake the beast. You invite it into your backyard. You give it a map of your bunkers. You force it to draw lines in waters you thought you controlled. And when the beast comes, it doesn't roar. It strikes without a sound. And by the time the world sees the impact, it's already too late. What followed in the days after the strike was a complete psychological collapse among the Houthi ranks as intercepted chatter revealed infighting, paranoia, and breakdowns in command cohesion, all sparked by the realization that they had attacked not just any American submarine, but a vessel with the power to flatten their entire coastal infrastructure within minutes, and that the response had only been a fraction of that full potential. The USS Georgia had come and gone like a phantom, leaving no trail but the fiery remains of radar towers and ammunition dumps. Satellite imagery broadcast across U.S. intelligence networks showed cratered warehouses, sunken skiffs, and burning coastal outposts, all formerly used by Houthi forces to coordinate their Red Sea operations. The sudden destruction sent shockwaves through the ranks of Iranian Quds Force operatives embedded in Yemen, whose faces turned pale at the sheer speed and accuracy of the American retaliation. In Riyadh and Tel Aviv, military planners praised the U.S. for setting a precedent of zero tolerance in contested waters. Even Egypt, often careful in its military commentary, applauded the defense of free navigation in the Suez-adjacent lanes. In the Situation Room, as the final confirmation of destroyed targets came in, the president looked across the table at his advisors and gave a subtle nod, an unspoken acknowledgement that the United States had just sent a warning that would echo far beyond the region. That same evening, U.S. media outlets lit up with special reports, showing exclusive footage released by the Department of Defense. Infrared video from drones capturing the precise moment of missile impacts, submarine periscope footage showing the instant of launch, and testimony from unnamed officials describing the orchestration of a strike that had gone from order to execution in under 12 hours. The public response was electric. Americans, often exhausted by prolonged overseas engagements, rallied behind a clear, decisive use of force that demonstrated both power and restraint. This wasn't war, one veteran-turned-commentator declared on national television. This was a demonstration, and the world had watched it live. In foreign capitals, especially those with ambitions to see denial and asymmetric naval disruption, the message was received with stark clarity. The South China Sea, Black Sea, and even the Eastern Mediterranean saw a drop in provocative naval maneuvers in the weeks following the Red Sea incident. Nations realized that if America could mobilize such surgical precision without even surfacing a single asset, then challenging its maritime dominance was not just foolish, it was suicidal. On Capitol Hill, defense committees met in emergency sessions not to criticize, but to approve further funding for submarine warfare programs, with bipartisan support pushing forward classified initiatives to advance undersea drone integration, laser-guided torpedo systems, and autonomous decoy submarines that could overwhelm any adversary sonar net. Naval shipyards were given new timelines and expanded budgets to bring forth the next generation of stealth subs, while top U.S. military academies incorporated the Red Sea retaliation into their strategic studies programs. This, one admiral said during a debriefing, is how deterrence is reborn. Meanwhile, the Houthis, now relegated to damaged bunkers and scrambling communication channels, began broadcasting erratic messages blaming the United States, Saudi Arabia, and even internal traitors for their misfortune, try to rewrite the narrative before it cemented in the global consciousness. But it was too late. The story had been told, the footage released, the operation archived, and the warning delivered. In Tehran, generals reviewed the footage in silence, aware that their regional strategy had just been thrown into disarray by a single submerged platform that never fired a second shot. The United States hadn't just punished a rogue attack. It had rewritten the rules of engagement for the modern age, gone with the drawn-out campaigns and escalatory traps of the past. In their place stood a doctrine forged in steel, silence, and certainty. Strike once, strike hard, vanish. And that doctrine, now baptized in Red Sea waters, would be the template for future confrontations in any theater where America's enemies dared to miscalculate. As the USS Georgia slipped further into classified operations and her crew resumed the silent vigil that defines the submarine force, the legend grew. She had not only survived an ambush but had emerged as a hunter, her retaliation echoing across continents. Her actions became the stuff of classified briefings, whispered about in foreign naval academies, and feared in adversarial war games. The strike was not just a response. It was a transformation, a paradigm shift in how modern maritime warfare would be waged. No longer would the enemies of the United States view submarines as lurking threats. They would see them as omens, heralds of destruction that could reshape battles without ever breaking the surface. And as the days turned to weeks and tensions flared elsewhere across the globe, the name USS Georgia became more than a vessel identifier. It became a symbol, a statement, a vow, that those who target the United States, no matter how small or desperate or emboldened by foreign powers, will face not just retaliation, but absolute obliteration. In the end, the Houthis didn't just pick the wrong submarine to attack. They picked the wrong enemy to provoke. And now, the world knows exactly what happens when you make that mistake.